Many thanks for joining us. My name is Felicity Ezewuike. For our viewers just joining us on DSTV 422, this is One Slot, the program where we talk about issues that affect Africa and look for uniquely African solutions to all problems. Thank you for joining us once again. Let's begin. Now, the world's population is expected to reach almost 10 billion people by 2050, and much of that growth will be in Africa, where the growth rate is more than double that of South Asia, the world's next fastest growing region. If this trend persists by 2050, 2 out of every 5 newborns worldwide will be African. This invariably means more mouths to feed in a continent already struggling with food insecurity. Now, the recent pandemic and the current war in Ukraine has further compounded the situation. But the sad truth is that food should not be one of Africa's struggles. It's a cliche, all right, what I'm about to say, but I'll gladly say it. Africa has all it needs: land mass, favorable environmental conditions, and youth population to feed not only herself, but to be the world's next food basket. Being food sufficient and exporting to the world is to Africa's benefit. Scholars insist it is key to her economic development. Here is a picture. In 2018, the agriculture sector accounted for only 16% of sub-Saharan Africa GDP, but it employed 55% of the workforce. So imagine the impact increased productivity could have on the population and the economy. Now more than ever before, there is an urgency, and it is imperative that we seek implementable ideas and solutions so we can comfortably feed ourselves. To share his perspective and growth ideas, I have with me Dr. Edify Humakule. He is an agriculture economist and a scientist. He has also served the Zambian government as a minister. He joins us from Lusaka. A very warm welcome and thanks for joining us on One Slot, sir.
Thank you very much, and greetings to our wonderful continent of Africa.
Population growth is tied to virtually everything. So let's begin by finding out the plus side to Africa's population growth predictions for agriculture.
Yeah, first of all, allow me to give a preamble that in the year 2003, the African heads of state met in Mozambique to discuss how to develop agriculture on the African continent. And it culminated into what they called the Maputo Protocol, where it was agreed that, or resolved that, every African government will each year in the annual budgets commit 10% of that budget towards agricultural development. And if you recall, recently they just ended the Heads of State Summit, the Executive Council of the African Union, which was held in Lusaka, also thrust its debate on nutrition, on human capital development, on how to feed Africa's ever-increasing population. And so Africa is home to around 1.3 billion people, and that population, as you rightly put it, is expected to increase, perhaps even almost doubling by the year 2050. And most of the population growth will be taking place in Africa. But as things stand, some 27% of Africa's population is classified as severely threatened by food crisis, according to the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization. 27% of our population is not food secure, representing some over 300 million of our people grappling with food supply. And so we have work to do, and this problem has been worsened by the COVID-19, the Russia-Ukraine war, and certain other variables that we haven't put in place. But nevertheless, agriculture contributes around 23% to the gross domestic product on average of an African country. And if well managed, agriculture can help us manage unemployment, manage poverty, and also improve our balance of payments at national level for each African country, and also reduce inflation And in the end, even interest rates, borrowing will be a lot cheaper. So there's a multitude of benefits that can come through by investing in agriculture.
Okay. I want to, before I go to the questions I have for you, I want you to tell us a bit more about the summit. You said one of the topics is about feeding Africa. What was the conversation around that particular aspect? What did you talk about? What were some of the resolutions that were taken at the summit?
Is to look at increased support towards food production, increased intra-trade within Africa, between countries. Before we import, we need to trade with each other and support with each other. But much more important, the prerequisite for agricultural investment is peace and security, and ensuring that each country exploits its comparative advantage so that each country produces what it can produce best, given its resource, efficiency, and effectiveness, so that productivity can go up and eventually we can be food secure and our nutrition can improve. So it's much more to center the growth of the African economy on agriculture, taking cognizance to the fact that certain wasting assets like minerals, which cannot be renewed, can never guarantee future economic growth because we can never replace it. But agriculture, every year you can grow crops, you can produce animals, you can reproduce your birds, you can reproduce your milk over and over again. So it's a heavily sustainable option.
Okay. I wonder, this conversation is taking a line based on what you just said about feeding Africa. You talked about intra-trade, peace and security, and infrastructure. These are very key issues. What was it that was talked about intra-trade? Because we know we have the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. Aside of that, what kind of conversation did you have on enhancing intra-trade in Africa?
There are several facets, but allow me first to just highlight some. Agriculture is broad. There's trade in raw materials, trade in semi-finished products, trade in finished products, trade in services. But before we get into all that, African governments need to invest in farming systems to ensure that we have ecologically friendly farming systems, ensure that we manage our already limited land resources effectively, because not every piece of land can be used for agriculture. We need to invest in mechanization, biotechnology, invest in production subsidies. Every successful agricultural economy is supporting its producers. Extension, human capital, agro-processing. So you don't export raw materials, but export finished products. With the exporting of raw materials, we are also exporting jobs and factories. And then also infrastructure, tax relaxation, if you like, and also export support. So
right.
intra-trade is extremely important so that Africa's production capacity of foods and other related products that are produced in Africa are first of all consumed in Africa before we begin to supply to other continents. Yeah.
Yes, indeed. Let's go back to the population question, the population growth. A lot of persons would say that population growth will become urbanites, right? And that already more than 4 out of 5 of today's new Africans that will be born will be city dwellers. What would be the impact of this, shift, more urban population on agriculture?
First of all, we have a youthful population, very, very young population of a median age of under 20. That's the middle age, if you look at your measures of central tendency. And so what we are saying is, if our heads of state are saying agriculture is the way to go, we need an educated young population with the skills that are required to produce food for its people and for export. The whole world is now coming to Africa because that's where the land is, that's where the water is, that's where the resources are. But we've been grappling with this on the side of capital. And so, since we have this population that is coming through the natural population growth, we would like to see a very educated young population that can be utilized in the agricultural sector, especially in manufacturing and value addition, to exhaust the value chains right here at home, as opposed to our young people, going out of Africa to look for jobs. So we have this opportunity of population growth. Our job is to educate it, to prepare it for usefulness.
Let's talk about policy, agricultural policies. How is it impacting on efforts to grow the sector? We can start with your country. What are some of the policies that is working for you that you think if it is replicated, it will be better and help improve agriculture?
First of all, what is working like for Zambia is the stimulus towards the private sector participation and to have a private sector-led economy, which will try to exhaust both primary, secondary, and other tertiary products within the agriculture sector to increase the GDP contribution of agriculture, like for Zambia, from the current around 20% to probably even reach 30% by the year 2030. And when we do that, you will see that the economy will be self-sustaining. And when you look at inflation itself, you have food inflation and non-food inflation. So eventually, once we are food secure, the non-food inflation will also be diluted or will be weakened. And then in the end, we'll be exporting more, in the end, improve our balance of payments, and also ensure that our fiscal position improves.
Before we go on a break, how is our population growth impacting policy making when it comes to agriculture?
Come again?
I'm asking, how is our population growth impacting policy making as it affects agriculture?
Yes, first of all, the population as it increases means we have more mouths to feed. So the traditional production methods that we have had in the past of using hands and certain equipment that does not give you the sufficient production that we are looking for should be improved on. And that's why I talked about mechanization. This means also, where possible, we invest in irrigation, producing some more, maybe a second cycle of crops through irrigation. We need to see support in transportation, road networks, especially in rural areas, especially that agriculture is a rural-based activity. So we need to step up the production methods, and that's why I talked of farming systems. We also need to support our farmers through production subsidies. If you look at a big economy like the United States of America, only 2% of the American population feeds the rest of the 300 Americans. Only 2%, because they are well supported. And so we need to work through our cooperatives, through our farmer groupings, to ensure that the governments find it easier to transmit services and benefits to the farming community.
All right, let's go on a very short break. When we come back, we will be looking at some of the initiatives that is meant to improve domestic agriculture in Africa. That's what we'll be taking on after the break. Stay with us. Good to know you're still with us. Now, let's talk about emerging initiatives. There is talk about it being specifically tailored to encourage investment in domestic agriculture. What can you tell us about these?
To encourage investment in agriculture, we really have to ease the doing of business conditionalities in each of our countries. At the moment, if anyone came to invest, you may find there's so much paperwork that is hindering the speedy settling in, if you like, of most of the investors. So primarily, we'll be very happy if we have more and more African investors. It would be best, for example, if a Nigerian came to invest in South Africa or in Zambia, and the other way around, as opposed to the European investors. Much as we need them, it is best that we help homegrown investors to grow, to begin to develop industries that are wholly owned by Africans. However, it is still extremely important to interact with Europe, with China, with Russia, with America, in as far as the technology upgrading is concerned. We need that intercourse between and amongst countries to exchange knowledge and skills. And beyond that, the African market may be small in terms of consumption. So we may need to grow products that are tailor-made for China, tailor-made for the US, and so on, because we are now in a global village. So in the market sense, we need each other in terms of interaction.
Right. Talking of needing each other, you earlier when you were speaking, you talked about how Zambia improved the sector by leveraging PPP. What can you tell us about that? Is there a particular PPP that comes to mind that you think is a good example of what a PPP should be?
Yes, there are quite a number of them. At the moment, the government is trying to invest in fertilizer production. What the single most expensive input in farming in Zambia, especially crop farming, is the fertilizer. So we are beginning to bring in foreign investors, and already soon, the government will be launching a project in fertilizer production. We have a lot of other companies in the what we call the multi-facility economic zones, which are processing fruits, extracting juice from our locally produced fruits, and they are producing all manner of drinks. And they are too numerous to mention. So the manufacturing industry in Zambia is beginning to grow, and thanks to the focused position that the government has taken. We have also quite a number of other facets where government has loosened the regulations in terms of exportation. For example, it was difficult to export to the Congo, so many regulations, but there's a relaxation towards some of these bottlenecks that we have been experiencing in the country. So there are quite numerous examples of PPPs at SME level, small and medium enterprises, larger enterprises, and also multinationals that are coming through to partner with the Zambian companies in a process of matchmaking. So you find one Zambian company that has an interest in a particular product, then you match it with another foreign company, and then they put in some share capital together, either through a franchise or any other arrangement to ensure that there's a win-win situation for both business entities.
I asked this question specifically because if something is working in Zambia, there's a possibility that if it is copied someplace else, it will also work. What would be your assessment of how African governments are leveraging the public-private partnership model to grow agriculture?
Thank you. In Zambia, we work through the Zambia Development Agency, which is under the Ministry of Commerce and goes out of its way to benchmark and see how other countries are running their business models, and then also to domesticate some of those models back here at home. And so what we are seeing is that there's a stimulus of the SMEs, and one package the government has put in place is what we call Constituency Development Fund, which is money that is channeled through constituencies to the people, to the small entities that are in far-flung areas that have certain interests, but can bulk together and make a difference. And they say small is beautiful, so we shouldn't despise small enterprises. But however, what I've seen is actually relaxation of regulations. This has been a big problem. And I'll be very happy if we can also look at perhaps even zero rating all the capital goods that are coming into Zambia. Already we are enjoying almost very little tax, but if we can remove it completely, for example, we don't make tractors. Why should we pay duty on tractors? Just let it come in as it is. Before we begin to manufacture fertilizer to meet our domestic demand, why have taxation on fertilizer? Just let it come in because we need it anyway. That will ensure that we produce at a lower cost and make our exports attractive. And so the SMEs have come on board, doing business with government, doing business within themselves, doing business with foreign entities that are willing to partner with them because of the conducive environment that has been created by the government and also by the many players that are so zealous to see how we can exploit this opportunity to produce and supply to our 8 neighbors. Zambia is in the middle of 8 countries. So we see our neighbors as potential markets and also potential outlets for both technology and products.
You talked about loosened regulation when it comes to developing capacity in agricultural production. And you also talked about how government is making things easier for farmers. I would like to find out from you what other things you believe governments can do aside policy adjustment to improve on agriculture production capacity.
Yes, to improve on agriculture production capacity, and we have to think of it in a much broader sense to include the livestock sector as not just opposed to just crops and so on. Yeah, so we need a policy that has a huge thrust on research and development so that if you look at on the crop side, we need better varieties of seeds. We need research in irrigation, research in domesticating machinery production. A lot of our young people are innovating and producing exciting products that can be used at home. And I'm talking of machines that are what I can call sustainable technology, some that may not even require expensive inputs. So we need to look at that. We also need to ensure that we don't export raw materials. We process here exhaust value chains. Like I earlier said, we need factories in Africa and in Zambia that produce finished products so that we exercise what we call import substitution. Instead of importing certain products, we produce our own to standards that are acceptable. Packaging. At the moment, we sell in the open market and the packaging is not of international standards. So we need to work with these groups of women, groups of youths, to train them into packaging, record keeping, and all those issues so that they can compete on the international market.
Okay. Instead of seeing rising population, in my introduction, I talked about having more mouths to feed, and you concord. You said Africa's population is growing. How can governments, as part of their initiatives or efforts to grow agricultural sector, make use of this growing population for the benefit of the sector?
Thank you very much. The population is growing. But what I'm seeing at the moment is that a lot of young people who are going into universities and colleges are taking up white-collar jobs, white-collar training. They want to be accountants, they want to be human resource managers, very few are taking science-based courses like engineering, electrical, mechanical, in the engineering field, because we need skills that will respond to the requirements of the food production desires. That's what we need. And the only way is to ensure that our young people show interest in blue-collar jobs. Like some of us, I'm a qualified farm manager, I've managed 5,000 cattle and so on at a tender age. But it was not fashionable because friends tend to look down on you. They think, being in an office, in a white collar, and, sitting around and just admin-related jobs is what they consider a good job. But all the solutions to Africa's problems, the growth that Africa desires is in the dirt, is in the soils. The minerals are in the soils. The crops we grow must stand on the soil. So we need to be willing to get dirty. So we need to encourage and shift the paradigms of, especially attitudes of our young people, to begin to take up artisan skills, plumbing, mechanical, automotive, and several other, skills that are required in agriculture. So that's one shift that I would really want to see, because at the moment, almost everywhere people are looking for white-collar jobs. So that boom in population is good, but we must prepare it for production. Preparing for production is to take interest in non-white-collar jobs.
I mean, that is very important if we are to make any headway at all in agriculture, growing it, and not to talk of feeding the world. I want to go back, lest I forget, to something you said when we started. You said one of the ingredients that we need to grow the agricultural sector is peace and security. Is it possible for us to actually grow the sector without a semblance of peace in Africa? Because our current reality is that there is conflict in almost all parts of the continent.
You see, for production to take place, how long does it take to grow a crop? 4 to 6 months. How long does it take for you to raise a dairy cow? 3 years. How long does it take for you to build up a milk processing factory to produce cheese, butter, and maybe 3.5 years? And now if you have a population that is not at peace, always moving around looking for asylum, there's no way we can realize that growth or progress. At the moment in Africa, you're aware that there are pockets of war, pockets of internal instability. Almost on a daily basis, we read about such issues. Those situations are counterproductive to agriculture, because agriculture takes long to develop. There are a lot of other support services that must go with agriculture: banking services, telecommunications, ICT, roads, and the credit system to be developed, and also the skills for the farmers. Extension for it to reach the people. The agriculture officers must find people in one place of domicile as opposed to a nomadic population. So we need a lot of peace, we need security, we need stability for us to be able to become a major player in the food production equation of the globe.
I mean, it's intrinsically linked, peace and agricultural development, if we are to even inch towards trying to provide for the rest of the world. Now, in all of this, without addressing the education of farmers and the fear of mechanization that Dr. Edify has actually talked about, we can't really achieve much. People are worried about being displaced by mechanization. We've only scratched the surface. So after this break, we will ask these questions. Don't go away. Thanks for staying with us. I still have Dr. Edify Humakule, an agricultural economist, speaking with us on how we can feed Africa, really. Now, most agricultural production on the continent is carried out by small-scale farmers that oftentimes they produce at near subsistence level. What measures would you advise be taken that would improve their capacity?
Well, you are very right when you say the small-scale holders. By classification, those are the ones that have around 1 to 3 hectares. In some countries, they say 1 to 5 hectares. But they are small family farms that produce enough to eat and also some excess for selling, so that they realize some income, some farm get income. For small-scale farmers, the gaps that lead to underproduction or lower yields include the choice of planting materials. they tend to recycle seed, which is of inferior genetic disposition. And so we would be very happy if small-scale farmers can accommodate hybrids, of whatever crop, high-yielding varieties. For example, the average yield per hectare of maize, which we all know, under the small-scale sector is around 2.3, 2.5 tons per hectare. The large-scale farmers who have above average management will be able to harvest around 8 to 10 tons of maize on the same piece of land, same area, same location, same everything, same rainfall. Someone is harvesting 2.5, the other one is 8 tons. The reason is that the other one is using a hybrid, the other one is using recycled seed, which is some of the grain they kept from the previous harvest. So it's got genetic recession, which doesn't express itself fully as it was in the first generation that was area sold. Secondly, we see that they are still using inferior farming methods. They don't rotate their crops. You find if it's wheat, every year is wheat, every year is wheat. Now, cereals are heavy feeders. They extract a lot of nitrogen from the soil. They extract a lot of nutrients. So to keep your soils productive over time, you need to rotate. They rarely rotate. You should have wheat, or if it's maize, followed by a legume like groundnuts or soya. And then from there, maybe bring in vegetables and things like that. So their soils are not replenished. Thirdly, they rarely irrigate. They plant once a year, and then the rest of the year they are idle. The commercial farmers have the ability to irrigate, and that's why we are advocating for African governments to invest in irrigation support, water lifting devices, conveyors and applicators, so that farmers can produce 2 to 3 cycles in a year as opposed to relying on rain-fed production. And then they also have certain flaws. For example, planting depth, they plant too deep, germination is poor. The timing, so that's why we need now extension services to guide the farmer throughout the production cycle, to do demonstrations, to conduct demonstrations on farms so that farmers are well guided. Because we call them farmers. Some of them are retired teachers, retired lawyers, others have never been to school, and so on. So their knowledge of farming is scanty and simply based on what was handed over to them by their parents. So it's a generational kind of. So they rarely graduate from that 5 hectares and develop a desire to have 50 hectares. So they will be on the same piece of land forever and ever. Meanwhile, their families are growing. So right at family level, they're beginning to fail to feed them.
So we'll explore the part about education a little bit after this particular question. There's this fear of displacement. How vital are small-scale farmers in the bigger picture for agriculture in Africa?
They're extremely important because in most African countries, they account for around 60 to 70% of the total crop production, especially rain-fed production. And so they are an extremely important component towards our national food balance sheets, respective national food balance sheets, to ensure that we are food secure. In Zambia, they say no farmer, no food, no future. So food is a primary need. If you look at your Maslow's hierarchy of needs, food is a primary need. You can't do without. So we can't overemphasize the importance of small-scale farmers.
Small-scale farmers. Yeah, because I really needed to get your perspective on that, because there is always, when you talk about it, say big tech companies are coming, they're going to displace us and mechanize everything, I will be at a loss. But the truth is, there is daily advancement in tech that is not just plug and play. We also have these free access to funding that can only be assessed with education. where are we? You talked about that as well, giving them demonstrations on how they can better utilize their farmland. So where are we with educating farmers, and what areas need specific attention?
Most governments in Africa need to invest in rural extension or agricultural extension. The appropriate ratio is one agriculture officer or extension officer to about 50 farmers. But what we see now on average is one extension officer managing around 300, 400 farmers. He can't reach out to all those. It's very, very difficult. So we want to see our extension officers supported with the transport facilities, motorbikes, vehicles, communication facilities, to reach out to farmers, and also access to internet. Farmers must be able to access information on the internet. And when it comes to mechanization doesn't necessarily mean a diesel-propelled tractor. It could be an ox-drawn plow. That's mechanization. It's a lot better than digging with your hand.
Okay.
Ox-drawn harrow, ox-drawn cultivator, ox-drawn ridger. A walking tractor is diesel-propelled, but it's small, and someone can walk behind, and the price is affordable. So all that is mechanization. You talk of water lifting devices. It doesn't have to be big pumps. They can have small petrol-propelled engines which can lift water into reservoirs, and then thereafter they can irrigate as a community. We are talking of construction of dams to increase water supply in the rural areas, to ensure that farmers have access to water in the off-season when it's dry, and they can irrigate crops, of course, slightly smaller areas, but at least they'll be kept busy and they'll be able to increase their income even in the off-season. So this is one area where we find that we are still weak. There are too many farmers and too many other people taking up agriculture after retirement, but very few agriculture extension officers to impart knowledge and educate them, as you rightly put it.
How can we address this? How can we ensure we have more extension workers? And yes. I'm still going to come back to the question of displacement, but I just wanted to speak on that.
Yes, there are so many platforms to compensate for the inadequacies of the extension service. We now have ICT platforms, we have WhatsApp, we have internet, we have, like in Zambia, we have the Zambia National Farmers Union, they have an interface where they offload market information, commodity prices, and also certain technologies that emerge in and outside of the continent, which they share on those platforms. Because now, we thank God, because of the Android phones, information is just on your fingertips. But that is only possible for literate farmers who can read and write. For those who can't, they still need to have physical contact with the extension officer. But however, agriculture is a science and is also a business. You must make profit. But most more importantly, it's a science. And science is difficult to teach remotely. You've got to get there on the ground and show how it is done. But once they take off, the subsequent phases can be taught on Zoom platform like this one. They can be taught on television, on radio. There are so many platforms that we can use to compensate for the poor ratio of farmer to extension officer.
And that is very important, as well as the issue of the fear of displacement. I asked you earlier how important small-scale farmers are, and you reiterated that they are key to growing the sector. But there is this fear of displacement. Again, I ask, how do we address the fear of displacement by modernized farming? Because they'll say, if a machine can do what I'm doing, of what relevance am I really?
There's no need of fearing modern technology, modern tractors, modern equipment. The model that the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organizations had introduced in the eastern province of Zambia, for example, was what we call communally owned machines, farm machinery. So they will identify like 3 to 4 cooperatives and give that cluster of cooperatives maybe a tractor, a plow, a disc harrow, a boom sprayer, a planter, And then they'll take turns to prepare, because most of the failure to produce enough food is a result of poor timing of land preparation, tillage. Tillage is the most difficult of all. Planting is easy, weeding is a bit easier, but tillage. So you give a tractor to a cluster of cooperatives, and that is theirs, and they pay back the loan slowly. It was very, very successful, and I think we could replicate it in other areas. But of course, there are a few other cooperatives that failed to manage the tractors, especially in the area of maintenance. So I know that certain equipment, modern equipment, is expensive to acquire or to purchase, but as a group, there's strength in numbers. If they come together, they can buy one, they can loan one, and they can keep it there and use it not only for planting, but also for transportation, because they'll have a trailer as well. So that tends to ease their farming and liberate a lot of time for them to carry out other activities on the farms.
Access to markets. You talked about that in your opening statement, how we can improve intra-trade when it comes to pushing agricultural products. This is very key to growing the sector. How can we better address the question of access to markets for agricultural produce in Africa?
Well, they say information is power. Access to the market means access to information. So the more readily information is accessible through various platforms, the easier for all the players to be able to benefit from existing market opportunities domestically in their own home country, and also in the neighboring countries, and where opportunities of bulking are available. If you ask one farmer to export, let's say, to Venezuela, it's very difficult. But when they put it together, they can justify economic movements of such products. And then they know actually who put in 2 kilos, who put 5 kilos, who put 10 kilos. And then when the money comes, they can share out according to the ratios of their contributions. So mainly it has to do with information. And this information, I feel, should be available before production, so that the farmers are producing with forward prices, knowing if I produce this, I'm likely to sell at that, as opposed to simply producing for subsistence. So I find this very, very important.
Fair enough.
One more time, the strength in numbers, they need to come together as cooperatives, and then the governments will find it very, very easy to support them when they work as groups, as opposed to individuals.
Okay, I think it's about time we wrap things up, but not before I ask, what is the future of agriculture you see for Africa? And are we on the right track to keeping Africa fed and prosperous?
I think we are on the right track, just given the most recent heads of state summit at African Union level, where they came to Zambia just to discuss food security, food production. How can we turn this into a business viable enough to grow our GDPs, to help us in our balance of payments, and to ensure that we take away this embarrassment of failing to feed ourselves, importing food when the water is here, the land is here with us, the skills are developing, and the future is immense. Everybody's coming to Africa. Everybody's coming to Africa. Africa is the future of the world as far as food production is concerned.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Humakule, for speaking with us, sharing your thoughts, and most importantly, your time. Thanks again.
Thank you very much.
Before I leave your screen, let me just gently reiterate that instead of seeing the rising number of mouths to feed as a challenge, I had to repeat that question several times in different forms. The demographic shift, is indeed an opportunity to transform Africa's agricultural sector into the world's food basket. We can do it. I believe strongly that we can. As always, your time and your company is very appreciated. I look forward to being with you again next week. Until then, kuwa vizuri, and that's be well in Swahili. Bye for now.